You want to wake it up? Are you completely insane, Director Vexar? Commander Zillith's voice rose several octaves, her bioluminescent spots flashing a warning pattern of alarmed purple. These creatures leveled half their own planet before we even made contact. That was centuries ago, Commander, replied Director Vexar, his forearms gesturing in what the crew recognized as his reasonable but firm posture. And need I remind you that we're currently being pursued by a Kraxon battlecruiser with enough firepower to turn our research vessel into cosmic dust? The human's bioscan shows military training.
Oh, perfect, Zillith muttered.
So not just a human, but a combat human. Why don't we just invite the Kraxons aboard for tea while we're making terrible decisions? Lieutenant Drav, the ship's xenobiologist, cleared his throat. Well, the wet membrane sacs that served as his speaking apparatus made a bubbling sound that functioned as the equivalent. According to the ship's records, this specimen was preserved approximately 250 Earth years ago. His name is... Drav squinted at the display, the alien characters shifting to galactic standard. Lieutenant Commander James West. Fascinating, Zillith said with the driest tone possible. And how exactly is one primitive mammal going to save us from a Kraxon warship? Director Vexar's eye stalk swiveled toward the cryopod where the human floated in suspended animation. Humans are resourceful, and this particular one was part of their elite naval forces, specifically something called Navy SEALs. According to our research, these were considered among the most adaptive and lethal warriors on Earth. Excuse me, interrupted the ship's AI in its perpetually cheerful voice, but the Kraxon vessel will be within weapons range in approximately 42 minutes. May I suggest making a decision before we're all vaporized? Just a thought. Fine, Zillith hissed. Wake the human. But when it goes berserk and murders us all, I want my objection noted in the ship's log. She paused. You know, for the 3 seconds before the Kraxons blow us to atoms. Noted, Vexar said with a satisfied click of his jaw joints. Drav, begin revival procedures. Consciousness returned to James West like a freight train, sudden, violent, and with absolutely no regard for the fact that he'd been functionally dead for nearly 2.5 centuries. What the f... His voice came out as a croak, vocal cords remembering how to vibrate after centuries of disuse. The human is awake, announced a high-pitched voice somewhere above him. James forced his eyes open, immediately regretting the decision as bright light seared his retinas. Blinking rapidly, he tried to make sense of his surroundings. This wasn't the naval medical facility where he'd volunteered for the experimental cryonics program. The architecture was all wrong, curved and organic, with pulsing bioluminescent strips that definitely weren't standard Navy issue. Then he saw them, 3 distinctly non-human figures looming over his cryopod. Military training kicked in instantly. James assessed threats, exits, and potential weapons within seconds, all while keeping his face carefully neutral. The closest creature resembled a lanky blue grasshopper with 4 arms and swiveling eye stalks. The second was shorter, with iridescent scales and what appeared to be gills along her neck. The third looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a lemur, and then decided to make it walk upright. Can you understand us, Lieutenant Commander West? Asked the grasshopper-looking one. James blinked in surprise. You speak English? The 3 aliens exchanged glances. Translation implant, explained the octopus lemur, tapping what James now noticed was a small device attached to his temple. Automatically processes and converts linguistic patterns. You're actually hearing your own language while we hear ours. Convenient, James muttered, slowly sitting up. His muscles protested, but everything seemed to be working. Mind telling me where I am and why I've been woken up? Last thing I remember, I was signing up for a 5-year experimental cryo sleep. The scaled one made a sound that might have been a laugh. 5 years? Oh, that's adorable. Lieutenant Commander West, the grasshopper said formally. I am Director Vexar of the galactic science vessel Curiosity Unbounded. This is Commander Zillith. He gestured to the scaled one. And Lieutenant Drav, indicating the octopus lemur. And I'm afraid you've been asleep for somewhat longer than 5 years. James narrowed his eyes. How much longer? Approximately 250 of your Earth years, Drav said, consulting a floating holographic display. James felt his stomach drop. 250... He stopped, taking a deep breath. Panic wouldn't help. Everyone he knew, his sister in Phoenix, his buddies from Bud's training, even that bartender in San Diego he'd been working up the courage to ask out. They were all long dead. He'd known this was a possibility with experimental cryonics, but the reality hit harder than expected. I need a minute, he said quietly. I'm afraid we don't have a minute, Commander Zillith interjected. We're currently being pursued by a hostile vessel that will be within weapons range in She glanced at a display on her wrist. 38 minutes. James's head snapped up. Hostile vessel? Are we at war? We, the Galactic Confederation, are not officially at war with the Kraxon Empire, Director Vexor explained. However, this research vessel has, accidentally, entered disputed territory while cataloging new species. The Kraxons are known for their shoot-first diplomatic approach. And you woke me up because? James asked, already suspecting the answer. Because according to your military records, you're very good at improvising solutions to difficult tactical situations, Vexar replied. And we're scientists, not soldiers. James barked out a laugh. So you're telling me that in 250 years of technological advancement, your best option against an enemy warship is to defrost a Navy SEAL from the 21st century? Director Vexar's eye stalks drooped slightly. When you put it that way, it does sound rather desperate. It's completely desperate, Commander Zilith snapped. But our options are limited. Our engines are damaged, our shields are failing, and our weapon systems are designed for taking atmospheric samples, not ship-to-ship combat. James swung his legs over the side of the cryopod, testing his weight. Gravity felt slightly off, maybe 0.9 Earth normal, but manageable.
All right.
If I'm going to help, I need to know everything about this ship, the pursuing vessel, and what resources we have available. And clothes would be nice, he added, glancing down at the medical gown he was wearing. Lieutenant Drav hurried to a storage compartment. We've preserved your original clothing, though it may not be in ideal condition after all this time. I'll take what I can get, James replied, already mentally shifting into mission mode. 2.5 centuries might have passed, but the fundamentals of warfare probably hadn't changed much. Assess the situation, identify advantages, exploit enemy weaknesses, and above all, adapt. As he pulled on his surprisingly well-preserved Navy uniform, James allowed himself one brief moment of existential crisis. Everyone and everything he'd ever known was gone, reduced to history books or forgotten entirely. But there would be time to process that later, assuming they survived the next hour. All right, he said, zipping up his jacket and straightening his shoulders. Show me what we're working with. The bridge of the Curiosity Unbounded looked nothing like the naval vessels James was familiar with. Instead of rigid control stations and tactical displays, the room was arranged in a circular pattern with curved, organic-looking consoles that seemed to be partially grown rather than manufactured. Holographic displays floated at various stations, showing ship systems, sensor readings, and a real-time image of the pursuing vessel. That's the Kraxon ship? James asked, studying the predatory-looking craft that was steadily gaining on them. It resembled a manta ray crossed with a scorpion, all sharp angles and threatening protrusions. The merciless efficiency, Vexar confirmed. A mid-range battlecruiser with a crew complement of approximately 200, armed with plasma cannons, kinetic projectile launchers, and boarding capabilities. James whistled. And what do we have to work with? Commander Zilith gestured to a weapons console that looked pathetically small compared to the others. 2 sample collection lasers that could, theoretically, be repurposed as weapons. Their range is limited, and power output is minimal. We also have a small complement of probes that could be modified, but they're designed for scientific data collection, not combat. What about engines? Can we outrun them? Negative, replied the ship's AI, startling James. Engine efficiency is currently at 62% due to damage sustained while leaving the Kraxon atmosphere. At maximum output, the merciless efficiency will overtake us in 36 minutes and 14 seconds. James rubbed his chin, studying the tactical display. What's this area ahead? He asked, pointing to a dense cloud of particulate matter. An asteroid field with high concentrations of ionized dust, Lieutenant Drav explained. The ionization interferes with sensors and targeting systems. Can we make it there before they're in weapons range? Director Vexar's eye stalks perked up. Yes, but navigating through it will be extremely hazardous. Our sensors would be compromised as well. But you have manual controls, right? James asked. The 3 aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Technically, yes, Commander Zilith admitted. But no one pilots manually anymore. It's considered primitive. James couldn't help but grin. Well, lucky for you, I'm about as primitive as they come. Who's your best pilot? A small, previously unnoticed alien in the corner raised a tentacle. The creature resembled a blue starfish with an eye in the center and tentacles that split into delicate manipulators. That would be Flight Officer Trill, Vexar introduced. She's the most skilled navigator on board, though she's never attempted manual flight through an asteroid field. No time like the present to learn, James said, walking over to Trill's station. Mind if I see how your flight controls work? The starfish alien blinked her central eye nervously but shifted to make room. The manual override is rarely used, but the principles are simple. These control thrust, she demonstrated with 3 tentacles on what appeared to be a semi-solid gel interface. These adjust orientation. Another set of manipulators hovered over a different section. And these control fine maneuvering. James studied the controls, mentally comparing them to aircraft he'd piloted. Different, but the fundamentals were the same. Thrust, pitch, yaw, roll. I can work with this. Trill, you and I are going to fly this ship through that asteroid field and lose our friends back there. You can pilot our vessel? Director Vexer asked, doubt evident in his voice. I've flown everything from helicopters to experimental submersibles, James replied with more confidence than he felt. Physics is physics, no matter what century we're in. The question is, can your ship take the kind of punishment we're about to put it through? Commander Zillith made a sound that James interpreted as resigned acceptance. The Curiosity Unbounded was designed for atmospheric entry on gas giants. Its structural integrity is one of the few things I'm not worried about. Perfect, James said, settling into a position beside Trill. Now, does anyone have any brilliant ideas for what to do once we're in the asteroid field? Because losing them temporarily is only half a plan. The bridge fell silent. Wonderful, James muttered. All right, let's focus on step 1, not getting blown up in the next 30 minutes. Trill, show me exactly how these controls respond. As the starfish alien began demonstrating the flight system, James couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of his situation. If someone had told him back in 2027 that he'd wake up 250 years in the future to help a crew of aliens evade an enemy warship, he'd have recommended a good psychiatrist. Yet here he was, planning evasive maneuvers with a talking starfish. Life, as they said in Bud's training, was all about adapting to suck. And this definitely qualified. Entering the asteroid field in 3 minutes, announced the ship's AI in that insufferably chipper voice. Kraxon vessel has increased speed and will be within weapons range in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. They're cutting it rather close, aren't they? How exciting. Can someone please adjust that thing's personality settings? James asked as he familiarized himself with the flight controls. Believe me, we've tried, Commander Zillith muttered. It's been like this since we installed the last update. I heard that, the AI replied. And I'll have you know my personality matrix is functioning exactly as designed. I simply choose to maintain a positive attitude in the face of imminent destruction. James shook his head and focused on the approaching asteroid field. The swirling mass of rocks and ionized dust loomed ahead, a chaotic tangle that would challenge even the most advanced autopilot systems, which was exactly why they were switching to manual control. All right, Trill, on my mark. Transfer flight control to this station, James said, positioning his hands over the gel-like interface. Everyone else, secure yourselves. This is going to get rough. Director Vexar and the other crew members hurried to secure themselves at various stations. Commander Zillith took position at the weapons console, her scales rippling with what James assumed was anxiety. The Kraxon vessel is charging weapons, Lieutenant Drav reported, his voice bubbling with stress. Estimated time to firing range, 2 minutes. Transfer controls now, James ordered, and immediately felt the ship's systems respond to his touch. The gel interface was surprisingly intuitive, almost as if it could sense his intentions before he fully formed them. Increasing speed to maximum. Trill, be ready to help with fine adjustments once we're inside. The Curiosity Unbounded surged forward, its engines straining as James pushed them beyond recommended parameters. The asteroid field grew rapidly in the view screen, a maelstrom of spinning rocks and glittering dust. Kraxon vessel firing, shouted Drav. Evasive pattern delta, James called out, having no idea if that meant anything to this crew, but it sounded good. He jerked the controls, sending the ship into a spiraling dive that narrowly avoided the incoming plasma bolt. The energy weapon sizzled past, missing them by meters and striking an asteroid ahead, which exploded into fragments. Entering asteroid field in 5, 4, 3, 2... The AI counted down cheerfully. James gripped the controls tighter as they plunged into chaos. Massive rocks spun around them, some as large as buildings, others no bigger than basketballs but equally lethal at their current speed. The ionized dust immediately began interfering with their sensors, causing the holographic displays to flicker and distort. Sensors degrading, Trill reported, her eyes swiveling wildly to track multiple threats. Visibility reduced to 40%. Then we'll use the Mark I eyeball, James replied, focusing intensely on the view screen and the few fragments of sensor data still coming through. He weaved the ship through a narrow gap between 2 spinning asteroids, the hull scraping against the smaller one with a sound that set everyone's teeth, or whatever passed for teeth among this crew, on edge. The Kraxon vessel is still pursuing, Commander Zillith reported, but they've reduced speed. They're being more cautious. Good, James said, executing a tight turn around a particularly large asteroid. That buys us time. How's our engine status? Holding at 58% efficiency, the AI replied. Though I feel compelled to point out that your current flight pattern is reducing that figure by approximately 0.3% per minute, just so you know. James ignored the AI and continued navigating through the asteroid field, periodically glancing at the tactical display that showed the Kraxon ship falling further behind. They're more cautious because they have more to lose, he mused aloud. A research vessel can justify taking risks, but a military commander has to answer for damaged equipment. An astute observation, Director Vexer said, his eye stalks swiveling to observe James with newfound respect. You understand military psychology well. Some things don't change, even after 250 years, James replied, narrowly avoiding a collision with a spinning cluster of rocks. Now we need to come up with Phase 2 of this plan. We can't stay in this asteroid field forever. Commander Zilith's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue hue. There's a nebula approximately 2 hours from our current position at maximum speed. If we could reach it, the radiation would mask our presence completely. 2 hours is too long, James countered. They'd catch us before we got halfway there. We need to slow them down or disable them somehow. He paused, an idea forming. What exactly do those sample collection lasers do? Lieutenant Drav bubbled excitedly. They're designed to vaporize small portions of planetary material for spectroscopic analysis. Very precise, very focused, but limited range and power. And those probes you mentioned, they're for scientific data collection? Yes, Vexer confirmed. They contain a variety of sensors and sample collection tools. Some are equipped with small drilling mechanisms for obtaining core samples from asteroids or planetary bodies. A slow smile spread across James's face. I think I might have an idea. It's risky, probably stupid, and definitely not what those tools were designed for, but it might just work. Those are my favorite kind of plans, the AI chimed in cheerfully. Mine too, James said, surprising himself with how quickly he'd adapted to conversing with an artificial intelligence. All right, here's what we're going to do. This is, without question, the most insane plan I've ever heard, Commander Zilith declared, her scales now a vibrant orange that James had learned indicated extreme stress. And I once witnessed a Zorgian attempt to mate with a black hole. I'm not even going to ask how that turned out, James muttered as he helped Lieutenant Drav modify the scientific probes. They had set up a makeshift workshop in the ship's probe bay, hastily converting the delicate instruments into something decidedly more offensive. About as well as you'd expect, Zilith replied dryly. Which is to say, it was the last bad decision that particular Zorgian ever made. Let's hope our outcome is better, Director Vexar said, passing James a tool that resembled a cross between a screwdriver and a small octopus. The Kraxon vessel has slowed but is still following our ion trail. Even with the interference, they'll locate us eventually. James nodded, focusing on the probe in front of him. The device was roughly the size of a microwave oven, packed with sensors and sample collection equipment that he was now repurposing in ways the designers had definitely never intended. How many of these can we deploy simultaneously? The launch system can handle up to 6 at once, Drav explained, his tentacles working with surprising dexterity on another probe. But we only have 12 probes total, so we should be strategic. 6 will be enough for the first volley, James said. Are the laser modifications ready? Commander Zilith nodded reluctantly. We've recalibrated the sample lasers to operate at maximum power. They won't penetrate the Kraxon's shields, but they should be effective against unshielded targets, like asteroids. Perfect. James stepped back to admire their handiwork. The probes now contained a volatile mixture of chemicals from the ship's laboratory, set to ignite when the probe's drilling mechanism activated. It wasn't quite a torpedo, but it would create a substantial explosion on impact. Let's get these loaded and ready for deployment. As they worked, the ship continued to weave through the asteroid field under Trill's guidance. The starfish alien had proven to be an adept pupil, quickly grasping the principles of manual flight that James had demonstrated. The Curiosity Unbounded shuddered occasionally as smaller rocks impacted its hull, but the ship's structural integrity was holding. Kraxon vessel is adjusting course, the AI announced. They appear to be attempting to predict our exit point from the asteroid field. How clever of them. Can you show me their projected course? James asked, moving back to the bridge while Drav and a team of technicians finished preparing the probes. A holographic display materialized, showing the asteroid field and the position of both ships. The Kraxon vessel was indeed circling around, attempting to cut them off rather than follow directly through the dangerous field. They think we're heading for the nebula Commander Zelith mentioned, James observed. Which means they'll be waiting for us here. He pointed to a relatively clear area at the edge of the field. So instead, we'll exit here. He indicated a denser region almost perpendicular to their expected course. That area has 73% higher asteroid density, Trill noted, her eye blinking rapidly. Navigation will be extremely hazardous. Which is exactly why they won't expect us to go that way, James replied with a grim smile. Especially not at high speed. Director Vexar's jaw joints clacked nervously. You intend to accelerate through the densest part of the field? For about 30 seconds, yes, James confirmed. Just long enough to clear the field and launch our surprise. Then we'll make a run for that nebula while they're recovering. The statistical probability of successfully navigating that section at high speed is approximately 12.8%, the AI helpfully informed them. But don't let that discourage you. Some of history's greatest achievements had even lower odds of success. Thanks for the vote of confidence, James muttered. Drav, are the probes ready? The xenobiologist's voice came through the communication system. Ready for deployment. We've prepared all 12 as you specified. Good. Everyone secure yourselves for extreme maneuvers. Trill, I'll take the controls for this part. The starfish alien relinquished the pilot's station without argument, securing herself to a nearby console with her tentacles. The rest of the bridge crew likewise strapped in or attached themselves to various anchor points. James settled at the flight controls, taking a deep breath as he studied the path ahead. It would require split-second timing and reactions, threading the needle through a maelstrom of spinning rocks that could easily crush their vessel. The kind of flying that would be suicide with an AI or autopilot, but just barely possible with human intuition and a healthy disregard for safety protocols. Here goes nothing, he murmured, and pushed the engines to maximum. The Curiosity Unbounded leapt forward, accelerating into the densest part of the asteroid field. James's hands danced across the gel interface, making minute adjustments as they hurtled between massive rocks with clearances measured in meters. The ship shuddered and groaned, alarms blaring as they scraped past obstacles that appeared and disappeared in the ionized haze. Hull integrity at 92%, reported the AI, its cheerful tone finally showing signs of strain. 89%, 87%. Almost there, James grunted, executing a barrel roll to avoid a particularly large asteroid that loomed suddenly out of the dust. The maneuver threw everyone against their restraints, but saved them from a direct collision. Edge of the field in 5 seconds, Trill called out, her eye wide with what might have been terror or exhilaration. Launch probe volley on my mark, James ordered, lining up their exit trajectory. 3, 2, 1, mark! The ship burst from the asteroid field like a bullet from a gun, momentarily clear of obstacles. Behind them, 6 modified probes shot out from launch tubes, arcing toward carefully selected large asteroids near the field's edge. Firing lasers, Commander Zelith announced, activating the repurposed sample collection devices. Twin beams of concentrated energy lanced out from the ship, striking 2 asteroids near the probe's targets. The superheated rock exploded into fragments just as the probes reached their destinations and activated their drilling mechanisms. The result was spectacular. 6 nearly simultaneous explosions ripped through the edge of the asteroid field, sending thousands of fragments hurtling outward in a deadly shockwave. The Curiosity Unbounded was already accelerating away, but the Kraxon vessel, having positioned itself to intercept them, took the full brunt of the asteroid's shrapnel. Direct hits on the Kraxon ship, Drav reported excitedly, watching the sensor readings. Their shields are holding, but power fluctuations indicate significant strain. Launch the second volley, James ordered. Aim for these coordinates. He highlighted several points surrounding the Kraxon vessel's position. The remaining 6 probes launched, this time targeting the space around the enemy ship, rather than specific asteroids. As they detonated, they created a secondary wave of destruction that hammered the already stressed shields from multiple angles. On the tactical display, the Kraxon vessel's shield indicators flickered dangerously. Their primary shield generator is failing, Commander Zelith reported, unable to keep the astonishment from her voice. They're diverting power to emergency systems. Now's our chance, James said, plotting a course for the nebula. Maximum speed. They'll be busy with damage control for at least a few minutes. The Curiosity Unbounded surged forward, leaving behind the asteroid field and the crippled Kraxon vessel. On the view screen, they could see emergency lights flashing across the enemy ship's hull as it struggled to maintain shield integrity. I can't believe that worked, Director Vexar said, his eye stalk swiveling between James and the tactical display. You turned our scientific equipment into weapons. I turned your scientific equipment into distractions, James corrected. The asteroids did the actual damage. Sometimes the best weapon is the environment itself. Commander Zilith's scales had shifted to an impressed purple. The Kraxon vessel is moving again, but at reduced speed. They appear to be conducting repairs rather than pursuing at full capacity. Which gives us enough time to reach the nebula, James concluded, allowing himself to relax slightly for the first time since awakening. Once we're inside, we can lose them completely and make our way back to friendly territory. The bridge crew exchanged looks of cautious optimism. Even the AI seemed less irritatingly cheerful and more genuinely pleased as it announced, "Estimated time to nebula, 1 hour and 43 minutes. Probability of Kraxon interception before arrival, 18.2%. We might actually survive this." James leaned back in his seat, feeling the adrenaline high begin to fade. In its place came the crushing realization of his situation, stranded centuries in the future, among aliens, with no connection to the world he'd known. He pushed the thought aside. There would be time for existential crises later. "So," he said conversationally, "while we're waiting to reach safety, would someone mind filling me in on what I've missed in the last 250 years? Did the Cubs ever win another World Series?" The nebula loomed ahead, a vast cloud of glowing gas and dust that swirled in mesmerizing patterns of purple, blue, and green. The Curiosity Unbounded approached at maximum speed, the damaged Kraxon vessel still following but now nearly 30 minutes behind. "Nebula entry in 2 minutes, Trill announced from the pilot station. She had resumed control once they were clear of the asteroid field, allowing James to focus on strategy rather than moment-to-moment navigation. James studied the tactical display, noting with satisfaction that their makeshift defense had bought them the time they needed. The Kraxon ship was still pursuing, but its reduced speed confirmed that they'd inflicted significant damage to its propulsion systems. "Once we're inside, what's the plan?" Commander Zilith asked, her scales now a calm blue that James had learned indicated a more analytical state of mind. "The nebula will hide us temporarily, but we still need to return to Confederation space. The nebula contains high concentrations of radioactive isotopes that will mask our energy signature," Director Vexar explained to James. "But it will also interfere with our navigation and communication systems. We'll be effectively blind while inside." James nodded thoughtfully. "How long can we survive in there?" "The ship's radiation shielding will protect us for approximately 72 hours, Lieutenant Drav replied. "After that, the cumulative exposure would become dangerous. And how long would it take us to reach Confederation territory from here?" Director Vexar's eye stalks drooped slightly. "At our current engine efficiency, nearly 4 days of continuous travel." "So we can't simply hide in the nebula until the Kraxons give up," James concluded. "We need to repair the engines while we're inside. Engineering reports that they can restore efficiency to approximately 85% given enough time," the AI chimed in. "However, some repairs will require external access to the hull." James raised an eyebrow. "External access, as in spacewalks inside a radioactive nebula? It would be hazardous," Vexar admitted. "Our environmental suits provide limited protection against radiation. A repair team would have less than 30 minutes before reaching dangerous exposure levels." "I'll do it," James said without hesitation. The alien crew stared at him in surprise. "You?" Commander Zilith's scales rippled with confusion. "You've been conscious for less than 6 hours after 2.5 centuries of cryosleep. You're not even familiar with our technology." "I can follow instructions," James replied. "And more importantly, humans evolved on a planet with higher background radiation than most Confederation worlds. Our cellular repair mechanisms are more robust against radiation damage. Plus, I'm expendable." "Expendable?" Director Vexar repeated, his jaw joints clicking in what James had learned was confusion. "How do you calculate that?" James shrugged. "Everyone I ever knew is dead. I have no connections to this time period. If something goes wrong, you're losing a historical curiosity, not a valued crew member with family waiting at home." An uncomfortable silence fell over the bridge. "That is both incredibly logical and deeply sad," Lieutenant Drav finally said, his voice bubbling softly. "Just practical," James replied. "Now, who's going to teach me how your engines work before we reach the nebula?" Before anyone could respond, the ship's AI interrupted with sudden urgency. "Detecting energy surge from the Kraxon vessel. They're preparing to fire a long-range electromagnetic pulse weapon." "Evasive maneuvers," James shouted, but it was too late. The pulse hit them like an invisible tsunami, washing over the ship and temporarily shorting out several systems. The lights flickered, and multiple consoles went dark before emergency power rerouted to essential functions. "Damage report," Commander Zilith demanded as the ship stabilized.
Primary communication array offline, reported a technician from the engineering station.
Navigation systems compromised. Engine efficiency reduced to 43%.
They're trying to strand us, James realized. Without communications, we can't call for help.
Without navigation, we can't find our way through the nebula. And with damaged engines, we can't outrun them.
Entering nebula in 30 seconds, Trill announced, her voice steady despite the crisis.
Visibility will be reduced to minimum once we're inside. Director Vexar turned to James, all four of his arms gesturing in what the human had learned was a sign of deference. Lieutenant Commander West, it seems we need another one of your primitive but effective strategies. James surveyed the bridge, taking in the damage reports and the worried expressions of the alien crew.
They'd bought themselves some time with the asteroid field maneuver, but now they were facing a different kind of challenge.
This wasn't about outrunning or outgunning the enemy anymore. It was about surviving long enough to make repairs and find their way home.
All right, he said, determination hardening his voice.
Here's what we're going to do. The nebula enveloped the Curiosity Unbounded like a vast, glowing ocean. Visibility through the view screen was reduced to mere meters, the dense clouds of gas and dust illuminated from within by radiation-induced phosphorescence. Beautiful, but deadly. James stood in the ship's airlock, being fitted with an environmental suit that had been hastily adjusted to accommodate human physiology. The suit was unlike anything he'd seen on Earth. A semi-organic membrane that adhered to his body like a second skin, with a crystalline helmet that provided a full 360-degree field of vision. The suit will automatically seal any punctures under 2 centimeters in diameter, Lieutenant Drav explained as he helped James adjust the life support systems. But the radiation shielding is limited. You have 26 minutes before reaching harmful exposure levels, and absolute maximum exposure time is 35 minutes.
Understood, James replied, flexing his hands to test the suit's mobility.
It was surprisingly responsive, almost as if it were anticipating his movements.
Run me through the repair procedure one more time.
A holographic display appeared in his helmet, showing the damaged section of the engine housing.
The EMP damaged 3 of the 5 quantum resonance stabilizers, Drav explained, highlighting the components.
Without them, the engines can't maintain proper matter-antimatter containment, which limits our speed and efficiency.
And I'm just going to...
What? Plug in new ones? James asked, studying the schematic.
Not exactly, Commander Zilith interjected, entering the airlock area with what appeared to be 3 glowing crystals in a shielded container.
These are replacement resonance cores. You'll need to remove the damaged ones and install these.
The process is similar to replacing a battery, but with significantly more risk of catastrophic molecular destabilization.
Catastrophic molecular destabilization, James repeated flatly. You mean explosion? More like instantaneous disintegration of all matter within a 3-meter radius, Zilith corrected. But yes, essentially an explosion.
Wonderful, James muttered.
And let me guess, these things are extra sensitive while the engine is running, which we can't shut down because we need power to maintain life support in the nebula? Director Vexar, who had been observing from the doorway, made an impressed sound.
Your intuitive grasp of our technological limitations is remarkable for someone from your era. Less about intuition, more about Murphy's Law, James replied.
Anything that can go wrong, will go wrong, and at the worst possible time. Some things never change, even across centuries and species.
The ship shuddered slightly as it pushed deeper into the nebula.
Through the airlock's small viewport, James could see swirling patterns of luminescent gas flowing past the hull, occasionally punctuated by flashes of energy as radiation particles struck the ship's shields. The Kraxon vessel has entered the nebula approximately 6 minutes behind us, the ship's AI announced. Their sensors will be as compromised as ours, but they are following our ion trail. Estimated interception in 47 minutes unless we increase speed, which we can't do without fixing the engines, James concluded.
All right, let's get this over with. Trill, are you ready for Phase 2 once the engines are back online?
The starfish alien's voice came through the communication system. Course plotted as best as possible given our navigation limitations. Once engines are at 80% or higher, we can execute the maneuver.
Good. James secured the container of replacement crystals to his suit and moved toward the outer airlock door.
If I'm not back in 30 minutes, assume something went wrong and proceed with the backup plan. The backup plan has an estimated 32% chance of success, the AI reminded everyone cheerfully. Compared to your current plan's robust 38%. Thanks for the encouragement, James said dryly as the inner airlock door sealed. Depressurizing now. As the air hissed out of the chamber, James focused his mind on the task ahead. The repair itself wasn't particularly complex. Remove damaged components, insert new ones, reconnect power couplings. But the environment made it exponentially more dangerous. He'd be working in near-zero visibility, surrounded by radioactive particles, on components that could disintegrate him if mishandled. Just another day at the office for a Navy SEAL, he thought grimly as the outer door slid open, revealing the nebula in all its deadly beauty. James pushed off from the airlock, the suit's maneuvering thrusters activating automatically to guide him along the ship's hull. The nebula surrounded him completely now, a three-dimensional ocean of glowing gases that shifted and swirled with hypnotic patterns. In the distance, though distance was hard to gauge in this environment, occasional flashes of energy illuminated the clouds, like silent lightning in a cosmic storm. "Proximity guide activated," announced a soft voice in his helmet that wasn't the ship's AI, but rather the suit's own guidance system. A path of glowing markers appeared in his field of vision, leading him toward the damaged engine section. James followed the markers, using the suit's thrusters to navigate around protrusions and antenna arrays on the hull. Despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He was the first human to perform a spacewalk inside a nebula, 250 years after his own time. If he survived this, it would make one hell of a story. Not that there was anyone left from his era to tell it to. "Approaching damaged engine section," the suit announced. "Caution, radiation levels exceeding recommended parameters. Exposure time remaining, 24 minutes. The engine housing came into view, a massive cylindrical structure with intricate patterns of technology that were beyond James's comprehension. Fortunately, the damaged components were clearly visible, 3 dark spots in an otherwise glowing matrix of energy conduits. "I've reached the damaged section," James reported through his comlink. "Beginning removal of the first resonance stabilizer." "Proceed with caution." Drav's voice came through, slightly distorted by the nebula's interference. "Remember to discharge the residual energy before extraction." James carefully followed the procedure they had reviewed, placing a specialized tool against the first damaged crystal. The tool hummed briefly, drawing out remnant energy, before a soft chime indicated it was safe to proceed. He twisted the crystal housing counterclockwise, feeling a slight resistance before it detached from its mounting. "First stabilizer removed," he reported, securing the dead crystal to his suit. Moving to the second. The process went smoothly until he reached the third stabilizer. As he applied the discharge tool, a surge of energy coursed through the system, likely a fluctuation caused by the nebula's radiation interacting with the damaged components. "Warning, energy spike detected," his suit announced a moment too late. The discharge tool sparked violently in his hand, and James felt a jolt of pain shoot up his arm despite the suit's protection. He jerked backward instinctively, the sudden movement sending him drifting away from the hull. "West, status report." Commander Zillith's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. "I'm okay," he grunted, using the thrusters to stabilize his position. "Tool's fried, but I'm still functional. The third stabilizer is only partially discharged. It's unstable." "Abort the repair," Director Vexar ordered immediately. "Return to the airlock. We'll devise another solution." James glanced at the engine section, where the third crystal was now pulsing erratically, sending out small arcs of energy into the surrounding nebula gases. Each discharge caused the gases to flare brightly, creating a beacon that would be visible even through the nebula's interference. "Negative," he replied. "That unstable crystal is like a signal flare. The Kraxons will spot it from kilometers away. Besides, we need those engines at full capacity." He checked his suit's readout. "I have 19 minutes of safe exposure time left. I can do this." There was a pause before Drav responded hesitantly. "Without the discharge tool, you'll need to remove it manually. The risk of destabilization is significant." "Story of my life," James muttered. "Talk me through it." The next few minutes were a careful dance of adjustments and countermeasures, as James worked to remove the damaged crystal without triggering the catastrophic molecular destabilization they'd warned him about. His fingers moved with deliberate precision despite the growing numbness in his right arm where the electrical surge had hit him. "Crystal is free," he finally announced, carefully securing the unstable component in a separate compartment on his suit. "Beginning installation of replacements." Installing the new crystals was less nerve-wracking but required equal precision. Each one had to be aligned perfectly with its mounting before being rotated into place, at which point it would self-integrate with the ship's systems. "Final crystal installed," James reported as the third replacement locked into position with a satisfying click. Immediately, the engine section began to glow more intensely, power flowing through systems that had been running at reduced capacity. "Engine efficiency increasing," came the report from engineering. 65%, 72%, 78%, stabilizing at 83%, The repair was successful. James allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning back toward the airlock. Returning to the ship now. Trill, get ready to execute the maneuver as soon as I'm aboard. Understood, the starfish alien replied. Course already plotted, awaiting your return. As James made his way back along the hull, a flash of movement caught his attention. Through the swirling nebula gases, a dark shape was barely visible, large, predatory, moving with purpose. We've got company, he reported tensely. Kraxon's ship approaching from bearing. Hell, I can't tell in this soup, but they're close. Sensors confirm, the AI responded, its cheerful tone incongruous with the news it delivered. Kraxon vessel approximately 1,200 meters off our port side and closing. They appear to have detected our engine power increase. Time to extraction? James asked, increasing his speed toward the airlock. Airlock in 30 seconds at current velocity, his suit informed him. Radiation exposure at 78% of maximum safe limit. James pushed the thrusters to maximum, arrowing through the glowing gases toward the airlock that was now visible as a rectangular outline on the hull. Behind him, the nebula lit up with a sudden flash as the Kraxon ship fired a ranging shot. They're shooting blind, Commander Zillith reported. The shot missed by several hundred meters, but they're trying to locate us by our reaction. Don't return fire, James ordered as he reached the airlock and slapped the external control panel. Stick to the plan. The outer door slid open with agonizing slowness, and James practically threw himself inside. As soon as his magnetic boots contacted the deck, he hit the emergency pressurization control. I'm in! Execute the maneuver! The ship lurched violently as Trill engaged the newly repaired engines, sending them surging deeper into the nebula at maximum speed. James braced himself against the airlock wall as the rapid acceleration combined with the still incomplete pressurization created a momentary vertigo. Suit removal must wait, Director Vexer's voice came through the comm. Secure yourself for extreme maneuvers. Phase 2 is commencing. James locked his boots to the deck and grabbed a safety harness from the wall, strapping himself in just as the ship performed a stomach-churning roll to port, followed by a sharp dive that would have been impossible with the damaged engines. Kraxon vessel is firing again, reported the AI. Still missing, but their targeting is improving with each shot. Through the small viewport in the airlock, James could see flashes of energy illuminating the nebula as the Kraxon ship fired blindly into the glowing clouds. Trill was performing a masterful job of evasive maneuvers, using the repaired engines to their full potential as they executed the plan they had devised. The Curiosity Unbounded continued its wild course through the nebula, making random changes in direction and speed to throw off pursuit, while gradually working their way toward a specific region they had identified before entering. Approaching target coordinates, Trill announced after several minutes of high-G maneuvering. Preparing for Phase 3. Status of the Kraxon vessel? James asked, still secured in the airlock, his suit's radiation warnings now blinking insistently. They continue to pursue, but their firing has become more sporadic, Commander Zillith replied. I believe they're having difficulty tracking us through the nebula interference. Perfect, James said with grim satisfaction. Deploy the final probe on my mark. The plan was audacious, possibly suicidal, but it was their best chance at escape. They had modified their final scientific probe with a mixture of chemicals similar to those used in their asteroid field gambit, but with one crucial difference. This one was designed to ignite the nebula gases themselves. Target coordinates reached, Trill reported. Course set for emergency nebula exit. Ready to engage on your command. James took a deep breath. Launch probe and execute exit course. Now! The ship shuddered slightly as the last probe launched, then surged forward as Trill engaged the engines at maximum thrust along their pre-plotted escape vector. Behind them, the probe drifted for a moment before activating. The result was spectacular. The nebula was already volatile, filled with radioactive particles and energy discharges. The probe's detonation acted as a catalyst, creating a chain reaction that spread outward at incredible speed. Gases ignited, energy pathways formed, and within seconds, a significant portion of the nebula had transformed into a raging firestorm of cosmic proportions. Nebula combustion exceeding expected parameters, the AI announced, its voice actually showing signs of alarm for once. Shockwave approaching at 17,000 meters per second. Brace for impact, James shouted, tightening his harness as the ship hurtled toward the edge of the nebula. The shockwave hit them like a giant's hand, sending the Curiosity Unbounded tumbling end over end despite Trill's best efforts at the controls. Warning alarms blared throughout the ship as systems overloaded and hull integrity was tested to its limits. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4, someone reported through the chaos. Emergency containment fields holding. Engines at 91%. The surge actually boosted our power output, came another report. James held on grimly as the ship continued its wild ride, propelled by both its own engines and the massive force of the exploding nebula behind them. Through the viewport, he could see they were approaching the edge of the gas cloud, the stars beyond becoming visible as the density decreased.
"Exiting nebula in 5 seconds," Trill called out.
With a final surge, the Curiosity Unbounded burst from the nebula like a cork from a bottle, trailing streamers of glowing gas as it emerged into open space.
Behind them, a significant portion of the nebula was now a roiling inferno of cosmic fire, the chain reaction continuing to spread through the volatile gases.
"Stabilizing course," Trill reported, her voice tight with concentration as she fought to bring the ship under control.
"Any sign of the Kraxon vessel?"
Director Vexer asked once they had achieved something approaching stable flight. There was a pause as the crew checked the newly functional sensor readings.
"No signs of pursuit,"
Commander Zillith finally reported, her scales shifting to a cautious yellow-green. They were much deeper in the nebula than we were when the reaction began. If they survived at all, they'll be dealing with significant damage. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but James couldn't join in. The radiation warnings in his suit had progressed from blinking to a solid red, and he could feel the numbness in his extremities that indicated he'd exceeded the safe exposure limit. "I need to get out of this suit," he managed, his voice sounding distant to his own ears.
"Right now."
The celebration cut off abruptly as Drav rushed into the airlock, immediately recognizing the situation.
"Medical team to the airlock, emergency protocol 7, he shouted into his communicator.
"Radiation exposure!" As the xenobiologist helped him remove the contaminated suit, James felt his consciousness beginning to fade. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the concerned faces of the alien crew who had, against all odds, become his comrades in the span of a single day. James awoke to the now familiar sound of the ship's AI.
"Good morning, Lieutenant Commander West."
"You'll be pleased to know that you're not dead, despite your best efforts to the contrary. Your vital signs are stabilizing, and cellular regeneration is proceeding at 132% of projected rates." "How exciting." He groaned and opened his eyes, finding himself in what appeared to be the ship's medical bay. Various monitoring devices were attached to his body, and a shimmer in the air above him suggested some kind of containment field. "What happened?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "You experienced severe radiation poisoning," replied a new voice. A slender alien with iridescent skin and 6 eyes arranged in a circle around her head approached his bedside. "I am Dr. Zalek, Chief Medical Officer. You've been unconscious for 76 hours while we treated your condition." 76 hours? James tried to sit up but found his body uncooperative. "The Kraxons are no longer a concern," came Director Vexer's voice as he entered the medical bay, followed by Commander Zillith and Lieutenant Drav. "We rendezvoused with a Confederation patrol 2 days ago. The Curiosity Unbounded is currently en route to Starbase Epsilon for repairs." "And the Kraxon vessel?" James asked. Commander Zillith's scales rippled with satisfaction. "Destroyed in the nebula explosion. They weren't as fortunate as we were in their positioning when the chain reaction began. Your strategy was unorthodox but effective," Vexer said, his eye stalks conveying what James had learned to recognize as respect. "The Confederation's Science Council has already requested a full report on how a primitive human from the 21st century managed to outsmart one of the most advanced military vessels in the Kraxon fleet." James managed a weak smile. "Just applying old principles to new technology. Warfare doesn't really change, just the tools we use to wage it." "A profound observation," Drav commented, his speaking membranes bubbling thoughtfully. "How bad was the radiation exposure?" James asked, turning his attention back to Dr. Jalek. The 6-eyed alien made a gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "By our standards, it should have been fatal. However, your human physiology proved surprisingly resilient. Humans evolved on a high-radiation world compared to most Confederation species, so your cellular repair mechanisms are more robust. Additionally, the cryogenic preservation seems to have altered your cellular structure in ways we don't fully understand. You're healing at an accelerated rate." "Lucky me," James murmured. "So what happens now? You drop me off at the nearest Earth colony or something?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the alien crew. "There's something you should know," Director Vexer said finally. "Earth is no longer the primary human homeworld." James felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "Approximately 23 Earth years after you entered cryosleep, a series of environmental catastrophes rendered the planet temporarily uninhabitable," Vexar explained gently. "The remaining human population evacuated to colonies throughout the solar system. When the Confederation made first contact with humanity in 2087, they assisted with faster-than-light travel development, and humans spread across dozens of worlds. Earth is recovering now," Drav added quickly, seeing James's expression. The Confederation has been overseeing a century-long restoration project. Some humans have returned to establish research outposts, but most of your species chose to remain among the stars rather than return to a single world. James closed his eyes, absorbing this new information. Humanity had become a spacefaring species, spread across the galaxy. It wasn't the catastrophe he'd initially feared, but it meant his connection to Earth was even more tenuous than he'd thought. However, Commander Zillith interjected, her scales shifting to a formal blue pattern. The Confederation Council has expressed great interest in you. As the only human to have experienced both pre-Exodus Earth and the current era, your perspective is considered invaluable. They've authorized me to offer you a position aboard this vessel, should you wish to accept it. James opened his eyes in surprise. A position? Doing what? Officially, you would be a cultural liaison and tactical advisor, Vexar explained. Unofficially, we could use someone with your unconventional problem-solving abilities. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Lieutenant Commander West, and the Curiosity Unbounded has a habit of finding trouble. Or having trouble find us, Drav added with a bubbling chuckle. For the first time since awakening in this strange future, James felt something like hope. He might be displaced in time, the last relic of an Earth that no longer existed as he knew it. But he had found a place where his skills were needed, where he could make a difference. I'm not exactly qualified to advise on cultures that didn't even exist in my time, he pointed out. Perhaps not, Zillith conceded. But you have demonstrated an exceptional ability to adapt to unfamiliar situations. That is a rare quality in any species. James considered the offer. Stay aboard an alien research vessel, exploring a galaxy he never knew existed, applying his outdated but apparently still useful skills to help a crew that had become something like friends in the span of a single crisis. It wasn't the future he had expected when he volunteered for cryosleep back in 2027, but then again, nothing about his situation was expected. One condition, he said finally. Someone has to explain to me what happened to the Cubs after 2027. Did they ever win another World Series? The alien crew exchanged confused glances. I believe, the ship's AI chimed in helpfully, he is referring to a sports team from old Earth. And yes, Lieutenant Commander West, according to historical records, the Chicago Cubs won the World Series in 2031, 2033, and 2047 before the franchise relocated to the Martian colony of New Chicago in 2078, where they've won an additional 7 championships. James laughed, the sound strange even to his own ears after everything he'd been through. 10 more championships? Well, that's something at least. He looked around at the alien faces surrounding his bed. Different species, different biologies, but united by curiosity, intelligence, and a shared purpose. Maybe this strange future held more for him than he'd initially thought. All right, he said, extending his hand in the human gesture of agreement. You've got yourself a tactical advisor. God knows you need one if you get into these kinds of situations regularly. Director Vexar reached out with one of his forearms, awkwardly but earnestly grasping James's hand. Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Commander West. Officially this time. Just James is fine, he replied. I think we're past formalities after blowing up a nebula together. James it is, Vexar agreed, his jaw joints clicking in what was clearly amusement. Rest now. The doctor says you'll be fully recovered in another day or two, and then... He gestured toward the viewport, where stars streaked by in the familiar pattern of faster-than-light travel. We have a galaxy to explore. As the alien crew filed out, leaving him to rest, James turned his gaze to the viewport and the infinite possibilities that lay beyond. He had lost everything, his world, his time, his people as he knew them. But perhaps he had gained something too, a new purpose, a new home among the stars, and the chance to represent humanity in a universe far larger and stranger than anyone from his time could have imagined. It wasn't the mission he had trained for back in Buds, but as SEALs were taught, adapt and overcome. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was adaptation. So, he murmured to himself as the stars streaked by, humanity found its way to the stars after all. And somehow, despite everything, that knowledge felt like coming home. The end. So, let me get this straight, Captain Jake Morrison said, leaning back in his command chair with the kind of skeptical expression that suggested he'd heard this particular brand of cosmic nonsense before. A galactic empire that's been around for 40,000 years, with technology that makes our stuff look like stone knives and bearskins, sends out a desperate plea for help across the entire galaxy. And the only species that bothers to show up is us? His science officer, Dr. Elena Vasquez, adjusted her glasses and nodded grimly. That's about the size of it, Captain. The Zephyrian hegemony's distress signal has been broadcasting on all frequencies for 3 standard months. According to our long-range sensors, at least 47 different spacefaring civilizations received the transmission. And we're the only ones who changed course to investigate. Morrison rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar onset of what his crew had dubbed cosmic irony headache. It was a condition that seemed to plague humanity with disturbing regularity ever since they'd joined the galactic community 25 years ago. Of course we are, he muttered. Because apparently, when faced with a choice between basic decency and minding their own business, every other species in the galaxy collectively decided to become Switzerland. The bridge of the UES determination hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Though well-oiled was perhaps generous, considering the ship was held together by equal parts stubbornness, creative engineering, and what the chief engineer euphemistically called adaptive maintenance protocols. In layman's terms, they fixed things with whatever they could find and hoped for the best. Lieutenant Commander Beth Reeves, the ship's tactical officer, looked up from her console with a frown. Sir, I'm picking up massive energy signatures from the Zephyrian home system. Whatever's happening down there, it's not pretty. Morrison sighed. Define not pretty in terms I can understand. Are we talking needs a band-aid not pretty or planet-sized funeral pyre not pretty? More like reality is having a very bad day, not pretty, Reeves replied. I'm reading gravitational anomalies, temporal flux, and what appears to be space-time having an existential crisis. Fantastic. Morrison stood up and walked to the main view screen, where the Zephyrian system was displayed in all its chaotic glory. 3 suns danced around each other in an intricate ballet of destruction, while the planets orbited in patterns that would have made Newton weep. Engineering, how long until we reach the system? The voice of Chief Engineer Patrick O'Brien crackled through the comm system, carrying its usual hint of barely contained panic. About 6 hours, Captain, assuming the universe doesn't decide to rearrange itself again. I've got the engines running at 95% efficiency, which is honestly miraculous considering half our parts are held together by hope and spite. That's the human way, Morrison said with genuine pride. All right, people, let's go save a dying empire, because apparently that's what we do now. The thing about ancient galactic empires, Morrison reflected as they entered the Zephyrian system, was that they had a tendency to be both magnificent and absolutely terrifying in equal measure. The Zephyrian hegemony had once controlled over 3,000 star systems, commanded fleets that could crack planets like eggs, and possessed technology that bordered on the mystical. Keyword had. Sweet mother of all that's holy, Dr. Vasquez whispered, staring at the readings flooding her console. Captain, I'm detecting massive temporal distortions throughout the system. It's like time itself is unraveling. The main view screen showed a sight that would have been beautiful if it weren't so obviously apocalyptic. The 3 suns were locked in a death spiral, their gravitational interaction creating ripples in space-time that manifested as shimmering aurora-like effects. The planets hung in impossible orbits, some moving backward through time, others frozen in temporal loops. And in the center of it all, like a jewel set in a crown of chaos, hung the Zephyrian homeworld. Incoming transmission, Communications Officer Lisa Park announced. It's definitely alien, but our translators are having trouble with it. Put it through, Morrison ordered. The view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at what could only be described as a cross between a praying mantis and a depressed philosophy professor. The being's compound eyes reflected the chaos of its dying world, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of millennia. I am Supreme Cognitor Zelthara of the Zephyrian hegemony, the alien said, its translated words carrying an undercurrent of exhaustion. For 3 of your months, we have broadcast our plea across the galaxy. Wars have been fought over lesser things. Empires have fallen for smaller causes. Yet of all the advanced civilizations that received our message, only you, humans, have answered. Morrison cleared his throat. Well, Supreme Cognator, I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Determination. We got your message, and frankly, we're a little confused about why we're the only ones here. Zelthara's head tilted in what might have been confusion or possibly existential despair. You are confused? We are the Zephyrian hegemony. We have existed since before your species discovered fire. Our knowledge spans the breadth of the cosmos. Our power once reshaped stars themselves, and yet, when we face extinction, only a species that has barely learned to leave its home system comes to our aid. Yeah, about that, Morrison said, settling into his diplomatic voice, which was really just his regular voice with slightly better posture. What exactly is the problem here? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your entire solar system is having a disagreement with the fundamental laws of physics.
The Supreme Cognitor's compound eyes seemed to dim. An experiment!
A glorious, terrible experiment. We sought to harness the power of temporal manipulation on a stellar scale. We believed we could create a perfect moment, a single instant of pure existence that would last forever.
Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. You tried to freeze time? We tried to perfect it, Zelthara corrected. To eliminate the chaos of temporal flow, the uncertainty of cause and effect. We would create a golden age that would never end. And instead you broke the universe, Morrison said flatly. We miscalculated. There was a moment of silence on the bridge, broken only by the gentle hum of machinery and the distant sound of O'Brien cursing at something in engineering.
Right, Morrison said finally. So you've got a temporal cascade failure. Reality is coming apart at the seams, and you need our help to fix it. The question is, why didn't any of the other 46 civilizations that got your message bother to show up? Zelthara's expression, insofar as a giant mantis could have expressions, became even more morose. Because they are wise, Captain Morrison. They understand that attempting to aid us would likely result in their own destruction. The temporal instabilities are spreading. Soon they will consume not just our system, but neighboring regions of space.
Eventually, perhaps the entire galaxy. So they're just going to let it happen? They are being pragmatic. Morrison looked around his bridge, noting the expressions on his crew's faces.
Vasquez looked fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Reeves appeared to be calculating firing solutions for problems that couldn't be solved with weapons. Park was frantically trying to establish communications with other ships that weren't there. O'Brien's voice could be heard over the intercom, explaining to the universe in colorful terms exactly what he thought of temporal mechanics. You know what, Supreme Cognitor? Morrison said, settling back into his chair. I think I'm starting to understand why the other guys didn't show up. This is exactly the kind of insane, impossible, utterly hopeless situation that every rational species would take one look at and decide to go have a nice cup of tea instead.
Zelthara's antennae drooped. Then you too will abandon us? Oh, hell no, Morrison said with a grin that was equal parts confidence and insanity.
We're humans. Impossible situations are kind of our thing. An hour later, Morrison found himself in the ship's conference room, staring at a holographic display that showed the Zephyrian system in all its impossible glory. The temporal distortions were getting worse, reality bending and twisting like a pretzel designed by a madman with a degree in theoretical physics. Okay, he said, addressing his senior staff. Let's hear it. How exactly does one go about unfucking the fundamental nature of time itself? Dr. Vasquez pulled up a series of calculations that looked like they'd been written by someone having a mathematical nervous breakdown. According to Zephyrian data, the temporal cascade began when they attempted to create what they call a chronological anchor, essentially a fixed point in time around which they could stabilize the flow of causality. That doesn't sound too insane, Reeves said cautiously. It wouldn't be if they hadn't tried to anchor it to the gravitational interaction of three massive stars, while simultaneously attempting to expand the effect across their entire solar system. O'Brien, who had joined them via hologram from engineering, shook his head. Let me guess. They tried to turn their entire star system into a temporal fortress, and instead they created a cosmic-scale time bomb. That's surprisingly accurate, Vasquez admitted. Morrison rubbed his forehead. So what are our options? And please don't tell me the answer involves building a time machine out of spare parts and good intentions. Actually, Vasquez said slowly, that's not far from the truth. The Zephyrian's temporal manipulator is still functional, but it's locked into a feedback loop. Every time it tries to stabilize the timeline, it creates more instability. It's like trying to calm a fire by throwing gasoline on it.
So we need to break the loop, Park said.
We need to break the loop, Vasquez confirmed. But here's the problem. The only way to do that is to introduce a controlled temporal paradox. Something that will disrupt the cascade without making everything worse.
Define controlled temporal paradox, Morrison said, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer.
Someone has to go back in time and prevent the Zephyrians from starting the experiment in the first place. The conference room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant sound of something exploding in engineering, followed by O'Brien's voice cheerfully announcing that everything was under control.
Right, Morrison said eventually.
Time travel. Of course, because fixing a broken timeline with more time travel makes perfect sense. It's actually theoretically sound, Vasquez insisted. If we can create a stable temporal loop that prevents the original experiment while preserving the causal chain that led to our arrival, we can collapse the cascade without creating a paradox. Reeves frowned. How do we prevent ourselves from creating a paradox while deliberately creating a paradox? Very carefully, Vasquez said. Morrison looked around the table at his crew, noting the mixture of determination and barely contained terror on their faces. You know what the really crazy part is? This isn't even the most insane thing we've tried this year. What was the most insane thing? Park asked. Remember when we tried to negotiate peace between those two hive mind species by teaching them to play poker? Oh, right, O'Brien said. That was a Tuesday, wasn't it? Thursday, actually. Tuesdays are when we usually deal with reality-threatening cosmic phenomena. Morrison stood up. All right, people, let's do this. Vasquez, work with the Zephyrians to calculate the exact temporal coordinates we need. Reeves, I want you to figure out how to get us close enough to their homeworld without being turned into quantum soup. O'Brien, do whatever it is you do to make impossible things work. What are you going to do, Captain? Park asked. Morrison grinned. I'm going to go explain to a 40,000-year-old galactic empire why their best hope for survival is a bunch of humans who've been in space for less than 3 decades. The conversation with Supreme Cognitor Zel Thara went about as well as could be expected, which is to say it started with confusion, progressed through disbelief, and ended with what Morrison was pretty sure was the Zephyrian equivalent of hysterical laughter. You wish to do what? Zel Thara asked, its compound eyes reflecting the chaotic light of its dying world. Travel back in time and convince your people not to start the experiment that caused all this, Morrison explained patiently. It's really quite simple when you think about it. Simple? Zel Thara's voice rose several octaves. Captain Morrison, do you understand the complexities involved in temporal manipulation? The paradoxes? The potential for creating causal loops that could unravel the very fabric of existence? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds complicated, Morrison admitted. But here's the thing. Your current plan of letting time collapse seems to be working out pretty poorly. Our plan might be crazy, but at least it's proactive crazy. Zel Thara was quiet for a long moment, and Morrison could almost hear the gears turning in the ancient alien's mind. Captain, may I ask you something? Sure. Why did your species answer our call? Why risk your lives for beings you have never met in a conflict that does not concern you? Morrison considered the question. It was a fair one, really. Why had humanity answered? Why were they always the ones rushing headfirst into situations that any sane species would avoid? You know, he said finally, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I think it comes down to this. We're kind of new to this whole galactic community thing. We've only been out here for 25 years, and in that time, we've discovered that the universe is full of ancient, wise, incredibly advanced civilizations. Yes? And apparently every single one of them is too smart to help anyone. Zel Thara's antennae twitched. Elaborate. Look, I get it. You've all been around for thousands of years. You've seen empires rise and fall, species come and go. You've learned to calculate the odds, weigh the risks, make the smart play. But sometimes the smart play is the wrong play. Morrison gestured toward the view screen, where the Zephyrian homeworld hung in its cocoon of temporal chaos. Your people are dying. Your entire civilization is about to be erased from existence. And instead of helping, 46 different species looked at the situation, did the math, and decided it wasn't worth the risk. They are being logical. They're being cowards, Morrison said bluntly. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe this is hopeless. Maybe we're all going to die horribly when we try to fix your time machine with spit and determination. But at least we'll die trying. Zel Thara was quiet for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice was softer than before. Your species is very young, Captain Morrison. You have not yet learned to fear the universe. Oh, we're terrified, Morrison said cheerfully. We are absolutely, completely, mind-numbingly scared of pretty much everything out here. The difference is we're too stubborn to let that stop us. And this is why you answered our call? This is why we answer everyone's call. Because someone has to. Because if we don't, who will? There was another long pause. And then Zel Thara made a sound that Morrison's translator rendered as a sigh. Very well, Captain. Tell me about this plan of yours. 3 hours later, Morrison found himself strapped into a modified shuttle that looked like it had been designed by someone who had only heard rumors about aerodynamics. The Zephyrians had provided what they optimistically called a temporal navigation matrix, which was essentially a very expensive way of saying, we're going to throw you back in time and hope you land in the right century. Remind me again why I'm the one doing this? Morrison asked through the comm system. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled back from the determination. Because you're the only one crazy enough to think this will work. And paradoxically, that makes you the most likely to succeed. That's either very reassuring or completely terrifying. Why not both? The shuttle's temporal drive hummed to life, and Morrison felt that peculiar sensation that all time travelers described as like being turned inside out while having an existential crisis. The stars outside began to shift and blur, and then suddenly, everything went white. When his vision cleared, Morrison found himself in orbit around a very different Zephyrian homeworld. Gone were the temporal distortions and reality-bending chaos. Instead, he was looking at a planet that practically gleamed with technological achievement. Cities that reached into the clouds, orbital installations that dwarfed Earth's space stations, and a sense of order and purpose that spoke of a civilization at the height of its power. Well, Morrison said to himself, this is either the right time, or I'm about to have a very awkward conversation with some very confused aliens. His comm system crackled to life, and a voice speaking perfect, unaccented English filled the shuttle. Unknown vessel, you are in restricted hegemony space. Identify yourself immediately or face the consequences. Morrison blinked. You speak English? We are the Zephyrian hegemony. We speak all languages. Now identify yourself. Right. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Ship Determination. I'm here to speak with Supreme Cognitor Zelthara about a matter of galactic importance. There was a pause. Captain Morrison, from Earth? But that is impossible. According to our records, your species will not achieve interstellar travel for another 18 years. Yeah, about that, Morrison said, settling into his best, I'm from the future and here to save you from yourselves voice. We need to talk. An hour later, Morrison found himself in what could only be described as the most intimidating conference room in the galaxy. The walls were covered in displays showing the extent of the Zephyrian hegemony. Thousands of star systems, billions of worlds, trillions of subjects. At the center of it all sat Supreme Cognitor Zelthara, looking exactly as it would 18 years in the future, except without the crushing weight of impending doom. You claim to be from the future, Zelthara said, its voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from ruling half the galaxy. This is a remarkable claim. It's a remarkable situation, Morrison replied. In about 6 hours, your people are going to begin an experiment in temporal manipulation. The goal is to create a stable chronological anchor that will allow you to perfect the flow of time itself. How could you possibly know about Project Eternal Moment? Zelthara demanded. That information is classified at the highest levels. Because in my timeline, it already happened, and it went very, very badly. Morrison activated his tablet, showing the recordings they'd made of the temporal cascade. Zelthara's compound eyes widened as it watched its homeworld being consumed by reality-warping chaos. This is impossible, Zelthara whispered. I'm afraid it's very possible. The temporal anchor you're planning to create will interact with the gravitational field of your 3 suns in ways your scientists haven't predicted. Instead of stabilizing time, it will create a cascade failure that will eventually consume not just your system, but potentially the entire galaxy. Zelthara stood up, its tall form towering over Morrison. And you have come back in time to prevent this? That's the plan. Though I have to say, the irony of using time travel to prevent a time travel disaster is not lost on me. There is a flaw in your logic, Captain Morrison, Zelthara said. If we do not conduct the experiment, then the cascade never occurs. If the cascade never occurs, then you never travel back in time to prevent it. It is a perfect paradox. Morrison grinned. Yeah, I thought of that, which is why I'm not here to stop you. I beg your pardon? I'm here to help you do it right. The next few hours were a blur of technical discussions, frantic calculations, and what Morrison was pretty sure was the Zephyrian equivalent of a very heated academic debate. Chief Temporal Engineer Vexandra, a tall, crystalline being whose multiple arms allowed it to manipulate several holographic displays simultaneously, had joined the discussion despite clearly thinking that Morrison was either a lunatic or the most sophisticated practical joker in galactic history. The solution, when it finally came, was both elegant and completely insane. So let me make sure I understand this, Morrison said, looking at the holographic display that showed the modified experimental setup. Instead of creating one massive temporal anchor, we create thousands of smaller ones, distributed throughout the system in a carefully calculated pattern. Precisely, said Vexandra, its crystalline form chiming softly as it gestured to the display. The distributed anchor points will create a stable temporal matrix that can handle the gravitational stresses without cascading. And the paradox problem? Is solved by the fact that we are not preventing the experiment, merely changing its parameters, Zelthara explained. The causal loop remains intact, but the outcome is altered. Morrison nodded, though he suspected he was missing about 12 different layers of temporal mechanics theory. And you're sure this will work? Nothing is certain when dealing with time manipulation, Vexandra admitted. But the mathematics are sound. That's good enough for me, Morrison said, standing up. When do we start? We? Zelthara asked. You don't think I came all this way just to give you a pep talk, do you? Besides, my ship has some unique characteristics that might be useful for this kind of work. What characteristics? Morrison grinned. We're really good at making things work that have no business working. The next few hours were controlled chaos. The determination had somehow managed to follow Morrison back through time, which O'Brien cheerfully explained was completely impossible but totally doable if you don't think about it too hard. The ship's jury-rigged systems proved surprisingly compatible with Zephyrian technology, mostly because, as Dr. Vasquez put it, both civilizations have a talent for making miracles happen through sheer bloody-mindedness. The modified experiment began at what the Zephyrians calculated to be the optimal temporal coordinates. Instead of one massive temporal anchor, they deployed a network of smaller devices throughout the system, each one carefully tuned to work in harmony with the others. Morrison watched from the bridge of the determination as the network came online. The space around the three suns began to shimmer with energy, but instead of the chaotic distortions he'd seen in the future, this was something altogether more controlled. Temporal matrix is stable, Dr. Vasquez reported. The anchor points are holding. Gravitational interactions are within acceptable parameters, added Reeves. And I haven't exploded yet, O'Brien called out cheerfully, which is always a good sign. On the main view screen, Supreme Cognitor Zelthara appeared. Captain Morrison, the experiment is proceeding flawlessly. Time flow has been stabilized throughout the system without any cascade effects. Glad to hear it, Morrison said. Though I have to ask, what are you going to do with a perfect temporal anchor? I mean, you've essentially created a pocket of space where time moves exactly the way you want it to. Zelthara's compound eyes seemed to brighten. We will use it to preserve knowledge, Captain. To create a repository of wisdom that will endure for all time. A gift to the galaxy that will never fade or be forgotten. Morrison felt a smile spreading across his face. You know what? That's actually a pretty good use for a temporal miracle. Indeed. And Captain? Yes? Thank you. For answering our call. For believing that we could find a better way. Morrison looked around his bridge, at his crew who had followed him through time to save a civilization they'd never met, and felt that familiar warmth that came from knowing they'd done something right. Don't mention it, he said. It's what we do. The journey back to their own time was considerably less dramatic than the trip backward, mostly because they now had a proper temporal navigation system, instead of what O'Brien had accurately described as a quantum prayer wheel. When the stars finally stopped spinning and the universe settled back into its proper configuration, Morrison found himself looking at a very different Zephyrian system. The temporal cascade was gone, replaced by a stable region of space-time that hummed with quiet energy. The three suns still danced their eternal dance, but now their gravitational interaction was perfectly controlled, creating a zone of temporal stability that extended throughout the system. Incoming transmission, Park announced. The view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at Supreme Cognitor Zelthara, but not the desperate, exhausted being they'd first encountered. This Zelthara stood in what was clearly a vast library, surrounded by holographic displays showing the accumulated knowledge of 40,000 years of galactic civilization. Captain Morrison, Zelthara said, its voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. Welcome back to the present. It's good to be back, Morrison said. Though I have to say, your timeline looks a lot better than it did a few hours ago. Thanks to your intervention, we have been able to create something truly remarkable. The Eternal Archive. A repository of knowledge that exists outside the normal flow of time. Every scientific discovery, every work of art, every moment of wisdom achieved by any species in the galaxy can be preserved here forever. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. That's incredible. You've essentially created a backup copy of galactic civilization. More than that, Zelthara said, we have created a resource that any species can access. A library that transcends the boundaries of space and time. Morrison felt a strange sense of pride, and all it took was a little human stubbornness and a willingness to break the universe in precisely the right way. Indeed. Though I confess, I am curious about something, Captain. What's that? In your original timeline, 47 civilizations received our distress call, but only humanity responded. Do you know why? Morrison considered the question. I think it's because we're new to all this. We haven't learned to be wise yet. Wisdom is not always the answer, Zelthara said. Sometimes the galaxy needs a little foolishness, a little hope, a little willingness to try the impossible. Well, if that's what you need, Morrison said with a grin, you've definitely called the right species. 3 days later, the Determination was preparing to leave the Zephyrian system when Morrison received an unexpected message. His comm system crackled to life, and he found himself listening to a transmission that was being broadcast across the entire galaxy. To all species and civilizations, the voice said. This is Supreme Cognitor Zelthara of the Zephyrian Hegemony. 3 days ago, our civilization faced extinction. In our desperation, we sent out a call for help to every spacefaring species within range. Of all who received our message, only one answered. Morrison felt his crew gathering around him as the message continued. The humans of Earth came to our aid not because they calculated the odds and found them favorable. They came because they believed it was the right thing to do. They risked their lives, their ship, and their future to save a civilization they had never met. The message paused, and when it resumed, Zelthara's voice carried a weight that seemed to echo across the cosmos. We have learned something important from our human friends. Wisdom is not always about knowing when to act. Sometimes it is about having the courage to act when action seems impossible. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but it is also full of beings who have forgotten how to hope. Morrison found himself smiling as the message reached its conclusion. To the humans of Earth, you have our eternal gratitude. To the rest of the galaxy, you have our eternal example. The Eternal Archive is now open to all species, a gift from the Zephyrian hegemony to the galaxy. But more importantly, it is a reminder that sometimes, the youngest voice in the room has the most important thing to say. The transmission ended, and Morrison's bridge fell silent for a moment. Well, Dr. Vasquez said finally, that was unexpectedly profound. Yeah, Morrison agreed. Though I still think we're just too stubborn to know when to quit. Maybe that's the same thing, Reeves suggested. Morrison looked out at the stars, at the infinite expanse of space that humanity was still learning to call home. Somewhere out there, 46 different civilizations were probably having very interesting conversations about the message they'd just received. And somewhere else, other species were facing problems that seemed impossible to solve. Set course for Earth, Morrison said. But keep the long-range sensors active. Something tells me we're going to be getting more calls for help. Looking forward to it, Captain, O'Brien said cheerfully. After all, what's the point of having a ship held together by determination and good intentions if you don't use it to attempt the impossible on a regular basis? Morrison laughed. You know what, O'Brien? I think you just summed up the entire human approach to space exploration. Was I wrong? Not even a little bit. As the Determination turned toward home, Morrison reflected on the past few days. They'd prevented a temporal cascade, saved a 40,000-year-old civilization, and apparently become the poster children for galactic altruism. Not bad for a week's work. But more importantly, they'd proven something that Morrison suspected the galaxy needed to remember. Sometimes, the best response to an impossible situation wasn't careful calculation or wise restraint. Sometimes, it was a little bit of hope, a little bit of stubbornness, and a whole lot of willingness to try anyway. After all, as humanity had learned over and over again, the impossible was really just another word for hasn't been done yet. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was doing things that hadn't been done yet. The stars stretched out before them, full of possibilities and problems in species that had forgotten how to believe in miracles. Morrison settled back into his captain's chair and smiled. It was going to be a very interesting voyage home. Epilogue. 6 months later, Captain Jake Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain to Earth Command why the Determination had received 43 separate requests for assistance in the past month alone. It's really quite simple, he said to Admiral Patricia Wong via subspace communication. Word got out that we're the species that actually shows up when people ask for help. Apparently that's rarer than we thought. Admiral Wong rubbed her temples in a gesture that Morrison recognized as the international sign for, I should have stayed in bed this morning. Captain, do you realize that 3 of these requests involve potential violations of the laws of physics? Only 3? Morrison asked, genuinely surprised. That's actually not bad for us. Morrison. Look, Admiral, I know it seems crazy. But here's the thing, we're good at this. Really good. And the galaxy needs someone who's willing to try the impossible. Admiral Wong was quiet for a long moment. You know what the really crazy part is, Captain? What's that? You're right. The Zephyrian archive has become the most valuable resource in the galaxy. Scientific breakthroughs that would have taken centuries are happening in months. Art and literature from across the cosmos are being shared freely. And it's all because one ship full of humans was too stubborn to ignore a call for help. Morrison grinned. So we're getting a commendation? You're getting a promotion, and a new ship, and a mandate to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, which is being impossibly, irrationally, magnificently human. Morrison looked around the bridge of the Determination, at his crew who had followed him through time and space and impossible situations, and felt that familiar warmth of belonging. Admiral, he said, I can't think of anything I'd rather be. The transmission ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. Well, people, looks like we're officially the galaxy's designated miracle workers. Does this mean we get a raise? O'Brien asked hopefully. It means we get more impossible missions. Even better. As the Determination continued its journey through the stars, Morrison reflected on how much had changed since they'd first received that desperate transmission from the Zephyrian hegemony. Humanity had gone from being the newcomers in the galactic community to being the species that everyone called when things got truly impossible. It wasn't the role they'd expected to play, but Morrison had to admit it suited them perfectly. After all, if you were going to be known for something, the species that never gives up wasn't a bad reputation to have. The stars stretched out before them, full of wonders and terrors and civilizations that had given up on hope. But as long as there were humans in the galaxy, Morrison knew, there would always be someone willing to answer the call, even if they were the only ones crazy enough to try.